To kick things off, Dan, I'd love to hear a bit about yourself, what you do, what drives you in your work, and how you ended up engaging with the Kairos assessment.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you for having me here today. I'm for those who don't know, I'm Dan Greenleaf. I'm the CEO of Duly Health and Care, which is the largest independent physician organization, a company with 1,600 clinicians, 190 locations, and a whole series of ancillary services. So in essence, the company is a hospital without walls. And if I think about my journey to this role, I've been a 6-time CEO. I've done 5 turnarounds, but I would say most of the decisions I've made along the path were soul choices, and the things I've tried to do, I've tried to, whether I knew it at the time or not, which I don't think I knew, but it was very important that I felt congruent about the work I was doing. And congruent from a soul standpoint, not just congruent from an intellectual standpoint, but very much a decision on, how do I serve others? How do I use my time, talents, and treasures to help others? What's the best use of my time, if you will, on this earth? I was fortunate to grow up in a family where service was very, very important. My father was a career military officer. My mother taught disabled children, and they also did a whole bunch of stuff on the sides. And so this idea of using your gifts, if you will, that those should be used to help other people or to make things better. And I've by and large followed that. And I think that because I've been a CEO now for 20 years, I've learned along the way, and I like this version of Dan as a CEO. I feel like I've gotten better, and I certainly think that the work that I've done with David Allen's group and GTD, along with Kairos, has been an invaluable part of that journey. And I think ultimately, I do believe, and I've talked to Julie Ireland around this, that GTD is largely kind of a spiritual journey. And it's a spiritual journey in the sense that what it affords you, which is, I think, a high degree of self-awareness, a high degree of self-regulation, that invariably allows you to be more present with people, because you're not using your brain to organize things. You're using your brain to generate ideas and to be present with others. The sidebar on this is that Kairos was at that time introduced to me. So this is back in 2012, and it was a really nice, I think, very complementary product to GTD. And for me, I'm what they called is, I know you know this term, ambidextrous, that I'm dead in the middle between associative and sequential. That's helped me a lot in terms of understanding that, and again, this is not one, as not one profile is better than the other, but I have a unique way of looking at the world. And then I'm, 50%, I know you know these terms, observer. And
Correct.
so, Frank will tell you that you're in the 0.0001% of people. And, it doesn't make me any more special. It just, this tool has been very helpful building on my self-awareness. And ultimately, I think self-awareness leads to self-regulation, which leads to being more present with others, to being in a place where, you understand kind of, hey, here's the framework that I'm looking at this problem or this opportunity or this solution. And I take it into account. And, there's Kairos GTD have been, game changers in many respects for me.
So after going through the Kairos assessment yourself, what made you decide to bring the Kairos experience to your team?
I've done all these assessments, the Myers-Briggs, the one, I don't remember the name of it, but it's a circle. But the challenge I've always had with these is, how do they translate to after you leave the session? And I've really felt that, Kairos is one of those tools that, that allows self-awareness that actually carries into the next day and the next day after that, and well into the future. And I think about our team, which turned out to be highly associative. And we've had people, some people on the team that are frankly on the extreme there. And there's just a couple of us who are ambidextrous. And then there's maybe one that's sequential. And so you think about that as it relates to, how our team is going to interact with the world and how we're going to approach things. And we have to be very careful, we don't, because the team is disproportionately associative, that we just ignore the sequential part entirely. And I think that's been some of the challenges. If I look back on why the organization got into the situation it did previously, or why didn't it get the results and execute the way it was capable of doing, is because it was overweighting this associative trait.
We see that a lot. We see most organizations that we work with is, you mentioned you're cognitively ambidextrous. That's 3 to 4% of the population, right? We see with the onboarding process, it's so much easier to interview people that think and communicate the way that you do.
Correct.
And so we actually see clusters, everybody, they find each other.
That's interesting.
So you'll hire a bunch of, so that's when especially when you have the 3 to 4% of the population and you get 3 or 4, maybe even 10. I think we had at one point, we had 80% of the team was right in that trough, right in that middle. But it's important to be aware of it, because if you do have a heavy skew, a tilt to one preference or the other, it's harder to have balance, right? And you can't, both sides are so important to do work. And so with the team workshop, was it last year that you engaged the team workshop with Fran Shop?
It was March or May of last year. Yep.
Okay. Have you seen any lasting shifts in how your team approaches communication now, in terms of understanding each other, problem solving? I don't know if there's anything you can put your thumb on.
I do think that, as I mentioned, from a problem-solving standpoint, that we disproportionately skewed towards associative. So we have to be very conscientious. I would also say that along those lines, my admin is ambidextrous, and her, the chief of staff who sits right across from her is ambidextrous. So the three of us, and what we find ourselves doing is pulling the group more into, the sequential part of this. And that's, I would say that's tough on us sometimes, because the other thing, there's several people who are using GTD coaching, and Duly Ireland is very involved there. And we've got one person who's, on the far end, extreme end of associative. And that's been very helpful in terms of how best to coach that person. Right. Because it's, again, you could go into this and saying, I don't understand why he or she gets something or why he or she doesn't get something. But when you can understand the framework at which they're coming at it from, you see that without, some type of structural course correction that you get from GTD, you could see how these traits become really challenging and problematic for the organization. So I would say that, from a we have to always say, are we doing enough sequential work? And so there's kind of this, oh, there it is again. We don't have enough people that are good at follow through. And again, if I think about like GTD, and I think David is highly associative. I don't know if the people are allowed to talk about that, but I think that's the case. But I do think that GTD, along with Kairos, can really help people become more effective leaders. And that's what I would say is, where does the rubber hit the road? Is that self-awareness leads to self-regulation that leads to kind of like, okay, what I'm doing is probably not working the way I'd like it to, and I'm somewhat sub-optimized. And I'm waking up in the middle of the night because I'm thinking about things that I don't have inventoried. And I know that I'm highly associative. So how do I bring this back so that, I can be optimized in what I do? And and I also think, like, again, I know this is not necessarily GTD discussion, but I fundamentally believe that if people do not have some type of workflow management system, that they are unable to scale. Like they move into these more senior roles and they're not capable of scaling because they don't match the complexity of the role with their skill set or whatever tools they might have in the toolbox. And so, I'd also say that, again, I think these things, as you know, are very complementary. And I don't think like you get the awareness without Kairos that you can apply to GTD. So I think that's what I would say. The other thing I would also mention, there's some fun stuff here. Like I'm more oriented towards movement and probably more orientated toward audio. And well before I took Kairos, I've always found myself when I want to learn something, I would listen to it and walk or listen to it and exercise. And my ability to kind of like absorb information was like 4 or 5 times higher. And my ability to retain that information was arguably 4 or 5 times higher when I did those things. So that was another thing that was an aha. The other one is like this observer where I'm at 50%. Frank will talk about it. He goes, look at your office. And it was fascinating because there's aesthetics and functionality, and it's right down the middle. It's like I see it everywhere. Like, okay, that's aesthetics, but the functionality associated with aesthetics is really powerful. And then on the reader side, I'm lower down the list. I know Frank is too, and Frank was as you know, a champion reader. In school, it has nothing to do with like your reading capabilities. It's just not how you like to get information. And I can't tell you how many times I've said, let's talk. When somebody writes me an extensive email, and I've made it really clear to people, do not send me extensive emails. And again, I had that instinct, but it was really validated by Kairos. And also, when I want to learn something, I think that, because of Kairos, I think about how I best learn things. And so if I'm reading a book, actually listening to a book and walking around is the best way for me to do it. So I think there's a lot of just general practical ways that you can apply this to.
There is a certain expectation I find that, we're working with a CEO of a financial firm right now, and her reader score is, almost off the chart. It's quite low. But to hear that there's other people like her that are at high positions is validating, right? She doesn't have to read long data, papers and things like that to stay ahead. She can, there's so many different ways to get information optimally, right?
Mhm.
And so it's interesting because she's in her 40s and this is new to her.
Yeah.
This is an aha moment
Yeah.
that this now gives her permission to request information in different ways. And it's like, that's painful. This should have been known 10, 15, 20 years ago. I know for me going through school, this would have been really helpful as well because I'm an active mover. I love to talk things out, think out all of my thoughts, and that's how I generate ideas and sometimes even get to conclusions is just walking and talking or running, exercising, sitting down, listening. It's my IQ points just slowly. Right. It's not beneficial. So,
I'm a talker too. Same thing. Like, it's very true. And I don't, and I also find when I'm spending the day sitting behind a desk reading something, it just drains me.
Right.
It like takes everything out of me. And like, so that's the other part of it. As a leader, that's not a good source of intake because it's not giving you what you need. What you need is what you described, talking. What you need is movement. What you need is perhaps something that comes to you auditorily. And and there's always this, and you see the high readers too. They just, my daughter, I'm certain, is a high reader. I mean, she could just sit all day and read books like nobody's business and reread them and reread them and reread them. And my son did the cognitive preferences because he was a bit dyslexic. And we're trying to get a handle on it. And Frank told him, which is again another great example. He said, "Listen, Dana, you just need to get through school, and then the way your brain works now, when you get out of school, it's going to be a superpower."
Oh, sure.
And he's an up and coming filmmaker that's 26, getting critical acclaim, and it's just really fascinating because he found a way to do well in school despite these things. But Frank's like, your brain is like going to be a superpower when you get out of school. And I think that was, when you're in 6th, 7th, 8th grade and you're struggling to figure out what the hell's going on, and you're getting, because the schools are largely designed for people who like to sit still, who are readers. It's like you're I would say adverse. You got unfairly impacted in many respects because of the way schools are designed. And I remember him, would stand up and they would complain about it. He'd write complaints like, "Well, Dana stands up in class," and he needed movement to activate his brain. And think about if they had known that at the time, and they wouldn't have been punitive about it. Like, he's being disruptive and he isn't listening. And he's like, no, he's not. He's actually trying to listen, and he's trying to find ways to listen better.
I remember Frank had told me, when he was teaching, he was able to recognize who the active movers were. He was able to recognize, okay, this student has been sitting down too long.
Right.
And so he would send them off to, deliver a note and then come back, and they'd come back all stimulated. And we need others to see that with other people. And that's what makes this work so challenging, is a lot of this is just invisible, right?
Or
Frank
visible
used the
in
metaphor
plain sight, right?
Or invisible. Yeah, exactly. He talks about, if you're on a bike and you've got a dragging brake and you don't know about it and your group doesn't know about it, you're pedaling and you could be in great shape. And so there's that expectation to stay at the same pace as everybody else. But man, it takes a lot more attention and energy to do that same thing, right? So if you're over on the associative side, it's going to take a lot more work to do sequential work. Doesn't mean you can't do it, but you're going to burn out pretty quickly. And it's so,
and that's why you need people
similar with all the other.
Right. So think about building a team. Part of this is like I know I'm optimized when I have an overly sequential person working with me or an ambidextrous. That's how I'm optimized.
Right.
And it's really fascinating because that's another way of like understanding how do you get the best out of you. And you do it by bringing people that truly complement you from a foundational standpoint. And, I would also say, I think this mover tendency is disproportionately associated with boys. I just think I think it's one of the reasons why, if you look at 9 out of 10 kids get medicated are boys, and it's because of this and their lack of understanding about it. And there's a school in Northeast, and Frank and I talked about it, all boys school. And I shared with him the story of, how they have some of these kids who are high movers just kind of running around the halls for periods of time, and not running around, but walking vigorously. And Frank knew the school. And, there are instances where there is awareness around this, but, I really do believe that boys are disproportionately medicated because of this. And I think disproportionately medicated also because disproportionately the teachers are female and they don't understand this aspect of gender and gender towards movement. And so what the answer is, let's medicate the boys. And because boyish behavior gets attributed to something negative in a classroom.
Right.
So that's
Labeling.
kind of, thank God that stuff didn't exist when I was growing up, because I'm certain, like even today, I just, I have to get up and move around like halfway through meetings, and I give myself, I allow myself to do that, like, because I know what I am doing.
Jeff Baliba, he's the VP of marketing at Burton, and he does not teach his students when they're, sitting down. He will not teach them in a classroom situation. Everything, even if it's, design and packaging, something they try to get out on the slopes, or they try to do something that, where they're moving, and he's instructing through movement, because he recognizes that in all of they've all taken the assessment, right? And so they're all active movers. So it's going to be beneficial for them while they're moving and learning through movement. So I'll let you
trait that our organization has too.
Movement?
Like their movement. Yep. For
Interesting.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's probably good hospital without walls.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah, no, very interesting.
Was that before or after the assessment?
Yeah, no, this company's been around 25 years, so
yeah,
well before I showed up.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. I'd love to again continue a conversation and learn more about your business, and but I'm sure I can get a little bit of that through Frank, and maybe we'll have to plan an in-person visit at some point.
That'd be great.
So. Yeah. Thanks so much, Dan.
All right. Thanks for your time. Yeah. Take care.